I think it is. Welcome everybody. The Living History Showcase. Commemorating two things this afternoon. Acknowledging the arrival of Threlkeld to Newcastle on the 8th of May in 1825. That's 200-year commemoration. And we have a relative, the Threlkeld, Sharon, who's joining us from Dunedoo. Out in Zoom land, I think we've got Shane. There he is, who's a descendant of the Awabakal people who couldn't join us today, but he's zooming in. So Shane, do you want to welcome us here today, and we'll start with the things. And the second thing, sorry, Shane, is the OPUS reunion, of which you're all gathered here. Okay, over to you, Shane.
G'day everyone. Even though I'm not there, I just want to welcome you to the traditional country of my people, the Awabakal people, and what a great occasion. I'm sorry I can't be there today, but I'm with you in spirit, put it that way. And yeah, it's great to be able to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Threlkeld and Biraban together, working to do something that hadn't been done basically around the world before. It's just an amazing feat that they achieved together, and it just shows that when people do put their minds, in the right place, we can achieve things that people today think is impossible. But just welcome everyone, and hope that we have a good meeting.
So what I'd like to do at this moment is just get Sharon to introduce herself and also her relatives. That are
so
online.
Linda, hello Linda. she wasn't quite sure whether she'd be able to hook up, but she has hooked up.
Well, that's great.
So she's down at Camden. So and unfortunately we had a couple of others that had a family death in the family. So anyway, so welcome. So my name's Sharon, and I come from Dunedoo, and my surname is Knott. And my mother was Brown, but her mother was a Threlkeld. And now when I grew up, like most of us, I just knew her as Netta Brown. And that's all I knew. And it wasn't, I was talking to my mum, and I was saying, Mum, when did we find out that Threlkeld was someone of significance? And she was saying it was, so my grandmother, her name was Mina, and her father, who was Arthur Threlkeld, died when he was 40 with an asthma attack. And he had 4 kids, and so her mother, my grandmother's mother, had to move in with her sister. So they got raised out at Liverpool, and obviously didn't have very much money. And so she was only 2 years of age. And so I doubt whether she would have known her distant relative. So her, she had Mari, who Linda's off, and Auntie Anne and Peter, and then Mina, my grandmother. And Auntie Anne, when she retired from nursing, she decided to join a museum. And that museum group went up to the Hunter area. Anyway, she comes back, so she's probably in her 60s at this stage. My mum's in her 30s. She comes back and she said, there's a Threlkeld house. This Threlkeld is everywhere. And there was a whole paper in the Telegraph. So another important thing about writing things down, in the Telegraph they had important people, and Threlkeld was on one of these papers, and he was given a land grant. And here we are struggling. Where's this land grant? Anyway, so that sort of instigated, we found out that we had an ancestor who was of significance. But again, it didn't really click to me with Threlkeld. But really, these iPads, in the last 10 years, iPads and being able to connect to everything, coming across the Hunter Living History site and their storytelling, and with COVID, that was just fantastic. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch that half-hour episode of Biraban and Threlkeld, but it really summarises everything. So on my Knott side, I go back, we had ropes. So on the first fleet. So when we talk about interconnections and all these linkages, like an octopus, I'm sort of more intrigued with how everything sort of connects. So there's an Anthony Rope and Elizabeth Pulley on the first fleet. They marry. So Rope marries Pulley. And then down the track, a Rope marries a knot, you know. So, but I know. But anyway, but on that first fleet, this Elizabeth Pulley, there's Elizabeth and Elizabeth, the book, you know, that's currently out about MacArthur and Macquarie's wives. But there was the 3 Elizabeths on that first fleet on the Friendship. And that on that Friendship was the assistant surgeon, Undell. And so Undell, he ends up coming over. He was escaping. He had a few love affairs over in England, but he comes over and he sets up a Caddy Park. And so I've sort of gone and traced all these, you know, things around. And, you know, I do a lot of travelling around the state and you're sort of feeling it in your bones, you know. So I go out there and it turned out that when Threlkeld, Lancelot's first wife, Martha, dies when they're over in the islands, he decides to go back to England, but he comes back to Sydney and he's out there at Windsor and he goes to Ebenezer and, of course, Thomas Undell's daughter, Sarah, is there. She's 28, obviously needs to be married, so he marries her. So he marries Sarah and they go, they obviously come up to Newcastle, up to the missionary, form the first missionary, which is interesting because Threlkeld was also going to be offered the Wellington Valley, and I'm at Dunedoo, and the Wellington Valley was the second inland convict settlement. It was established in 1823, but they decided to do Newcastle, and so from his marriage to Sarah, Thomas is the youngest, and I'm descended from Thomas. So it goes Thomas, Arthur, then my grandmother Mina, and then my mother, and then, of course, me. So, but it was interesting, like with Grace Castles talking about the people of the river and how they did a lot with the Biraban and, you know, naming of places along the river and how important that was for the Indigenous people along the river. You know, what Biraban and Threlkeld did, just like you guys with your magazine, it's just a coming together, you know, like would it happen again today? No, it was just a fluke, I think, the Goldilocks conditions that they were together at the same place at the same time. Biraban being able to talk English, speak English. My understanding is he couldn't write it, but he could speak it. And Threlkeld, well, the story is about him being a bit, you know, up himself and, you know, pompous. But you have to be like that if you're going to make things happen. And he was in the circus. He was an actor, so he was in the circus. He was in the theatre, so he knew how to, you know, perform things. And so he made things happen. And I think that's what the legacy is. You know, if they didn't record that, and it's the first recording in Australia of the Hunter River and the Lake Macquarie people here in the Newcastle area, that would have been lost. And you know, and like unlike a lot of where the missionaries were trying to convert the Indigenous people to, you know, Christianity, Threlkeld took the other step where he actually took the time to understand their language and to be able to speak their language. And he went over and over with Biraban to make sure that he recorded it properly. And he was you know, I feel like I've been piggy backed along the way. Like when I went for a ride this morning, you see the boats coming into your harbour, and, you know, the birds are just stopping on top of the boats and you think, oh, they're getting a free ride. Because there's so many people have done so much work beforehand, and it's just fantastic that the internet has allowed that to be spread across. So he documented it, just like you guys documented your magazine. And the thing is, they also now are discussing that past, which you guys, I'm sure, will be doing with your Optus, because if you don't do that, history is so easily lost. And we know if you don't keep talking about it, it just disappears altogether. So Carson's, she mentions about, because Anthony Rope and Elizabeth Pulley, they also move out to that Windsor area. And just the other day, I was reading a blog from another cousin, just purely that I come across, and Anthony Rope had stolen the copper from Sarah's mother to make liquor. So all these little things happening. But yeah, so anyway, but Mum also said that like my grandmother, there was 4 of them. They were called the Threlkelds at school, and I said, oh, so they obviously were outside a lot, but you just don't know where things lead, and I guess. I'm sort of, as I said, more just all the intertwining of, Indigenous languages, not just Threlkelds, but I mean, I was up in Central Australia for 3 years tour guiding up there, and, when you learn about the dot painting and like Geoffrey Barden, you start looking into these things. They say like a compass reading, it's not random. It sort of does point you in a direction that you want to go. And if you have an open mind, then you can find out a lot of things. So that's just... If you want to find more, I really recommend you watching that. It's a really good living stories story. Linda, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Whoops, she might got the voice on. Oops, no, it's not coming through, Linda. Oh. Sorry.
Oh, you'll have to do it in sign language.
Yeah.
There we go. There
we go. So, Linda, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, no, I think you've done a pretty good job there. Yeah,
so we've never been like a close family because, like, my mum, she got the first posting as grew up in Lakemba in a housing commission home. She got a bit of a scholarship, went to Wagga Wagga's Teachers College, and in the country, when you get posted to a little country town, guess what? You marry the farmer and then you have kids, and so you haven't got no time to do any research or anything. So I guess you've got to have that time and having curiosity. And I work a lot with kids, and I think having curiosity, that will make sure things happen. And so, as I said, I'm just glad we found out. But just a little side note, I know I'm going to be quick. So my mother loves doing photography. She lives down the south coast, and she puts little books together. And at the back of it, she's got for the grandkids, notable ancestors, Lancelot Threlkeld and James Meehan. Who was the Fenian convict that got sent out when came with Grimes and was going to be the Surveyor General, but because he was a Catholic and because, they didn't say. Anyway, so because when COVID hit, I thought I'd better investigate what line of Meehan we're off. And when I started doing that, it was impossible that we were off James Meehan. So I ended up getting a lady from the Castlereagh area and find your past. And I said, I'm looking for a James Meehan and da-da-da. Anyway, it turned out it was a Patrick James Meehan, whose father had been sent out here for stealing a pig. And then when his father had finished his term, he brought all his kids over, which, pretty amazing. But Patrick James unfortunately drowned crossing the Georges River. And so, again, when I lived in Sydney, I grew up in Dunedoo, went to Armidale Uni, so I didn't go to Newcastle Uni, and then down to Sydney. But I used to go across that Georges River, and you sort of think, you can imagine, crossing the river. His wife had crossed it with the baby. He's intoxicated, and he stumbles and falls in. So there's all these things like Lancelot's Thomas. He ends up dying at age 40. I think he was 49, so he died of tuberculosis. Like I said, Arthur, my grandmother's father, he died at 40. So these, it's not very long lives. So you've got to make the most of it. So I just thank everyone. I know you probably weren't here for the magazine, but I'm glad you've documented it, and I'm sure you'll share many stories. And it's always good to be able to look back and clarify some things, because when we were all young, we were sort of just too busy just writing sometimes without thinking of the consequences or where it might lead to. And I think this is what's important with this type of history sharing, is where it might lead to, because you just don't know who's reading it and how they might interpret it as well. So thank you, John. I'm glad I ran across John, and I'm glad I across Anne. And thanks, Linda, for coming. And we'll turn it over. And thanks very much, Shane. It was great. Can I get a photo of you and Shane?
Yeah, we've got it.
Do you want me to smile?
Yes, please.
Fantastic.
You're beautifully positioned on that.
Yeah, wonderful.
So thanks very much, Shane. And I appreciate that that we've been able to come together. And if you're ever coming out to Dunedoo, I am with the little museum in Dunedoo, and I'm finding out lots and lots of stories about Dunedoo. So it's more than welcome to join us.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to add, Threlkeld's become part of our heritage. So I feel in a way related to you, and we adopt people in, and Threlkeld's become part of who we are, and for those that don't know, my relatives were in Threlkeld's mission down there, Biraban, and my great and great grandmothers were both in that mission, and it's amazing to. I would have loved to have been there, and I would have given you a big hug, because I just feel you're part of our family, basically.
Yeah. I look forward to catching up there.
It'd be great.
But how good would it be? How good would it be if, unfortunately, we focus on the men in these histories. How good would it have been with Paddy, or my understanding, Biraban's wife, Paddy, and Sarah? How close were they, and the kids from Biraban with Threlkeld's kids? So we might find more out yet.
Well, I look at pictures of Threlkeld and I go, well, I'm looking into the eyes of someone who's been with my ancestors. His eyes have been there, his hands have been there and with them, and it's just amazing the work that he actually done, and what and how him and Biraban contributed. Sometimes we forget about Biraban, but he contributed so much. Without him, Threlkeld, we wouldn't be talking about Threlkeld probably today anyway. Mm-hmm. So these two men were absolute marvelous in what they done and what they've left for us, that legacy. Poor old Threlkeld in the end there's going, this is sort of, I've done this, but all these people are gone, and but it's there for the future for people to know about, and thank goodness we weren't all gone. We're still here, and it's just added so much, for our heritage, is to be able to look back and see what has been written. And it's amazing how much, what I've learnt from my grandmother, and that Threlkeld actually wrote about. And, when you read his accounts and that type of thing, you go, that's exactly what my grandma passed on to me, all those things, So, a lot of people tend to want to rip into Threlkeld and say, is this an old white man, an Englishman? What would he know? But he was just telling the story as he saw it, and for our people, that's an amazing thing for us. So it'd be good to meet up one day.
Well, I think once he sort of got booted out from Belmont, the missionary there, he set up Ebenezer over at Toronto, which is at the Toronto Hotel. So I think the Toronto Hotel might be a good spot to join up, Shane.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Can we all come too?
Yeah. Yeah, there's plenty more to the story.
Well, thank you very much to both of you and to the family descendants.
Thank you.
All right. Yes.
I think that you should explain that Emeritus Professor
John Fryer,
actually located the mission home, and it's in Victoria Street, Belmont, and it's right on the top of the hill in what's now a land that's owned by the Education Department, and it should be noted. I've taken Professor Fryer's documents and things to the council, to the local member, and so on, but nothing has happened as far as that's concerned. But it's really interesting because I wasn't quite sure whether Shane would be able to. We could talk. I talked to Shane about this because the Aboriginal people may not be happy with it. It depends how but Shane has given us the impression that they were happy with that and the work of Biraban.
I think the mission was pretty important, Shane, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely for us.
Which is...
Well, look, the real magical significance of Threlkeld and Biraban's relationship really is in a document we have downstairs, which is the first printed published text of 6 verses from Luke's gospel. And you might think, okay, so what? It's just the Bible. But at that time, you weren't considered a human being if you weren't a Christian and you didn't know how to read the Bible. So the act of actually understanding an Aboriginal language and translating the words of God into that language really helped transform Aboriginal people in the eyes of Europeans into being people. So it's quite a transformative act. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think that document, that 1828 circular, is as important here as the Declaration of Independence is for the United States. I mean, it's very important. It's not just translation work; it's also what was going on between these cultures. Because you couldn't accept testimony in a court of law without swearing on the Bible. If you didn't understand how to read it, how could you do it? So these guys, to me, are national heroes. And yes, of course, Doug, the places that they operated in should be remembered and the place names. So
a blue park, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. So that's the Threlkeld component and Biraban component of the afternoon. And now the next one will be the OPUS reunion. So OPUS is our student newspaper. It's been published since 1954, and we're on a hunt for the oldest surviving co-editor, and we have him here. These 2 ladies were typists. This is the co-editor, and these were the typists. Stand up and have a round of applause.
We submitted things as well. I remember writing a poem that got published.
Right. Well, I didn't. I did the typing, darling.
Well, I can't remember typing.
As a result, we got married.
All right, so we can have some naughty stories from the early days of so this is the university becomes autonomous in 1965. So if you have a look at the living history site, you'll see half of our opuses sit in 64 and the other half sit in 65, because this was a transition world between being the slave of the Sydney University class to ultimate freedom and being a university in your own right. So we've got a few editors scattered here, both physically. We have Linda and Marcus Westbury, OAM, Linda Drummond, who represent the 1990s. Matt Ward is the editor of the Tanner Opus, but was also instrumental in tracking down Alan on a bus. And then we have...
You were on the bus. You were on the bus.
I was on the bus, but you suggested it.
So was the University of Ties Hill in those days?
Yes.
Anyway, look, over to Alan. We'll call out. We might have some zooming in. I know that Angela Feltham is out there somewhere from the 1990s. There you go. We might have a few from Oregon who did the 2000s. So we might have 80. So look, you start talking, Alan, and then we'll just play it by ear. Over to you.
So some of you may remember the old Ties Hill campus, and there were a lot of stories that came out of that. I don't know if you all remember, but there used to be a tech college with the university. And what you may not have realised was that every Wednesday, the day secretarial course, participants, young women, used to come across to the union and go and have lunch. every Wednesday. And you can imagine that long corridor that went right down, you can start of the building up to the Union building at the end, which was just a large room. There would invariably be a lineup of young men and the parade of young women, usually in their heels, and we used to call them day sex. But every Wednesday at lunchtime there'd be this parade, and you'd have all these young male students lined up watching, and the girls, of course, loved it. I mean, they flirted and did all the other things that young women do. But that mixture of college and TAFE was, in a way, so Newcastle, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You know, the integration, because we had, I don't know if you realise it, but we had about the best, amongst the world's best skilled tradesmen. You know, between the BHP, the State Dockyard, Comsteel, all those industries had moved up. The BHP training room had 120 students or apprentices, you know, who were trained there, and they had the most modern equipment for the day, whereas the TAFE was usually 20 years behind. But the actual industries had really the best. And someone said to me, a very senior businessman out of Sydney said to me, you know, the reason you get so many small businesses growing up in Newcastle is because you produce such bloody good tradesmen that they get bored with doing it, you know, for the company, so they go out and do it themselves. And that was true. We had this plethora of young businessmen who were highly skilled, and I don't think we've ever recognised that. You know, as a community, we knew we were a blue collar, you know, kind of industrial town, but we never realised that didn't mean that you were dumb or unskilled. It just meant your skills were in metalworking and fabrication and all those things instead. Anyhow, back to you. I spent 2 years at Tighes Hill and then 2 years at Shortland. When we came to Shortland, there was one building only, McMullen, and everything was in there, except there was a pie wagon right here where the library is, and we shared the site with mosquitoes. And the tragedy of that was that it took us a year to build the first union building, but in the process, all of the university activities got lost. You know, we had very strong student players, and you can see in one of the 65 acres, we had the National Drama Festival for universities, you know, in Newcastle, based at Tighes Hill.
Jonathan Biggins.
And the performances of people like Colin Anderson, the Biggins, with Six Coats in Search for North, which is one of the best plays I've ever seen, and women like Helen Bell, who eventually married Arnie Nemi. You've probably all heard of Arnie Nemi, who was the director of Hunter Theatre Company. That we had, I met Anne and I started going out the night I'd been rehearsing for a town gown debate. So Francis Clack and I were debating Matt Hayes and another student. And that was at the on the campus. We had student players, we had a whole range of activities that most of the people who were active were in second year. That was the active year. First year you were a fresher and no one, you got ignored. And third year you had to finally do some work and try and pass exams. So second year was the year. So that year at Shortland, the first year, there was nothing. There was no building. People went home rather than share the mosquitoes. So we lost everything. And the year after, 66 or 67, by the time the freshers came in, that year, second year, had already moved on to third year. So that gap, and I don't think people ever realised just how bad that was for this university. We lost those institutions forever. And what came back, in many ways, were pale imitations, because there was no experience, there was no corporate memory of what we'd had at Tighes Hill. And you think about it, Tighes Hill had all up 2,000 students. We all knew each other. our lecturers, we all knew all of our lecturers. They all came to all of our parties.
We all drank
it was a whole
together as
in more ways than one. Norman Talbot had a child of one of the students, for example. So there was,
and Harry.
there wasn't a separation, and of course, town gown stuff was also quite powerful. As I showed with that town gown debate, which were regular features. So the opuses of the day, in a way, reflect that, but they also reflect something else, which is technology. We did not have offset printing. So the opuses we edited in 65 were pages of type because we had nothing else. Blocks were incredibly expensive, so we used the same blocks over and over and over, or blank spaces or other things, because the cost of blocks was, well, we just couldn't afford them, and we had these pages of really boring looking pages. So excuse the layout. But at the same year that I was editing, Tony and I were editing that, Threlkeld, New South Wales brought out Gas Flash, and Martin Sharp was in his heyday. I mean, absolutely stunning stuff in offset printing. We couldn't get that. It wasn't available. No one up here had it. We had to make it Mercury and the mountains of lead that we had to proofread very often not very well. So you have to recognise that we were that period was at the kind of crossroads of technology, both industrial and printing, of social change in terms of the university becoming autonomous, and a new sense of I suppose self-importance, that suddenly we were a proper university rather than just a college. And in fact, there's a funny story about that as well. I was on the SRC and of course the union board, so I was fairly involved in most of those things. We had this constant argument with Opportunity that we wanted a student on the University Council, and we've been campaigning for it for years. And then he said to us in about 66 or 67, there is a student on the University Council. And we said, no, there's not. He said, yes, there is. We said, who? And he said, John Church. Well, John Church from John Church Engineering and father of John Church NBN was an engineer who was doing an art degree part-time. So Ockie, after that, that's Ockie was the University Council because that meant he had a student that we couldn't complain anymore. So, I mean, and the battles with Ockie were epic. I mean, we had them all the time. So what I guess I should perhaps talk about.
Well, can I just say thank God for Newton John. Thank God for Newton John, who was always on our side.
Yes, he was.
Always on our side. And he used to balance Ockie so that we had a say.
And Val.
And Val.
Val, who ran the bookshop before she married me originally. But the thing I wanted to talk about particularly was that we had a few problems. Tony and I were in our mid-20s, so the previous editors, Gary Hayes and Malcolm Dunnyface, were two very bright young men, really capable and really nice guys. Malcolm's dad was a detective. Gary's dad worked in the BHP and I worked for him years later in the mould yard. So we were old fuddy-duddies. I mean, here we were. They'd done second year, and of course third year, they had to get serious. But so the first edition of 65 is theirs, and it's interesting to note there's an article by Gary Hayes about censorship, and then we found under the door, one of the early mornings we were there, this kind of poem written by Tim Firebrace. Now Tim Firebrace we knew was a pseudonym that Gary and Malcolm used for their poems, and they used it all the time, this Tim Firebrace. And it was a poem by Tim Firebrace talking about a Catholic virgins. And there was a thing of doggerel saying, hey diddle diddle, no hole in the middle, no hole in the rear side either. The little dog laughed and then he cried when he felt that he couldn't find either. There are a couple more verses. And obviously it was a dare to us old funny dummies that we wouldn't dare print that. I mean, this was like dare stuff. And of course, so we had to print it. Well, all hell broke out. We had the council debating it and about how the students of the day had become, irresponsible and pornographic and all the rest of it. We got investigated by the vice squad. Tony got called into the vice squad and got a lecture from the detective or whoever he was. And then he said, and you know what this leads to? Where this leads you to? And he went over to the safe and brought back a pile of photographs that were really pornographic. Mainly Filipino women engaged with men. When there was obviously they'd been confiscated, and this was their little hoard. And he was charged us as a warning, and obviously in showing this, it was obvious that he was enjoying showing this. And we were absolutely shocked because in those days that nudity just didn't happen. It didn't exist. So we thought, I guess. But then what happened then was that we thought, okay, what we should do, we should talk about it. So we organised a meeting at Tides Hill, and we had, with a room, it was a big room, it wasn't the union building itself, it wasn't a building, it was a separate room. We must have had 60, 80 people. And it went for hours, like 2 hours. And we had Clive Hart, who was a James Joyce specialist, and Norman Talbot, both give talks on censorship. Now, this was before Don Chip. This was at a time when Ulysses was banned, the Black Book by Durrell was banned, copy of Cancer, copy of Capricorn. They were all Lady Chatterley's Lover.
We used to read it in the library.
And the Lady Chatterley's Lover as well. They were all banned.
You terrible band.
Years later, I got my little mother to buy me copies of all of those when she was in America and Europe. Imagine this little dumpy lady from Newcastle who left school at 11 or 12, going up and asking Mr. books, which she then posted to me. So I had those before Chip. Anyhow, so this meeting went for 2 hours, and of course the engineers were all highly offended. How dare we do stuff like this? So these were the same guys who wanted to always sleep around but always marry a virgin. I mean, that was typical engineering kind of mentality.
I married one.
So in a way, we there. So a lot of our stuff is really boring, but a lot of it is deadly serious. There's articles in there on apartheid, the massacre in South Africa at the time. There's stuff on Vietnam, because that was just emerging as an issue in '65. And we're a really small campus. I mean, compared to the big university. But we were active, and at the same time we had Coombs' son at Sydney, we had Martin Sharp, we had Richard Walsh, Clive James. They were the same thing in the Sydney push. I don't know if any of you watched The Ladies in Black. If you did, have a think about it. The girl, I reckon, was Germaine Greer. The boy with Richard Walsh. Clive James was there. And I'm not sure who else, but of course the pub they went to was the old Lord George, which was the Sydney Push. The Sydney Push was a fairly famous kind of grouping of not libertarians, I suppose bohemians, I suppose would be the right word, beatniks, bohemians, whatever. And there was a group in Newcastle that was similar, based around jazz and, arguing and debating and that kind of stuff. But so in a sense, we saw our time here as a time to challenge and to test and to debate and to discuss and to question why we were all here and what we were doing here. So it wasn't, study was always secondary until the last bit. I can remember we had a party in my last year, my final year. because I was a part-time student for a lot of the time. I had a party.
Al, speak up a bit.
And Robert Iverack, who was a wonderful lecturer in English, was there. And I was really anxious because we planned to go overseas in January. And I said to Robin, I'm really worried about that I didn't do very well in that exam. And she said, oh, that's funny, we were talking about you the other day. And we're trying to decide whether to give you a pass or credit. So it better be a pass, hadn't it? So that was not so that was, I mean, we didn't normally talk to our lecturers about our results, but that one will kill you because we booked to leave on January the 8th. If I didn't pass, I didn't know what I was going to do because, we're going to drive. We then went over there from Titanic to London, Annie and I. So, that was really a lot of organising and so forth. Anyhow, that's probably enough. I've tried to give you a taste of both life and uni. And my encouragement to the young ones is I know what hell's done with the union stuff, and I know that we had much more freedom because we had control of our own money, and you haven't these days. But the thing is, you've got to challenge that. I haven't heard a thing in recent years about students complaining about how come they're controlled by the administration at both levels, both socially and academically. And I think you should be talking about that and arguing about that and saying this is not good. Look at what Trump's doing with Harvard and American universities. That's indicative of the same kind of mentality that we've got to control these young people because they get these outrageous thoughts and that they might do terrible things. Well, most of those outrageous thoughts become commonplace in 10 and 15 years' time. So you're going to be challenging and testing and arguing and thinking because you don't think by sitting and listening to somebody else. You think by challenging what they're saying and arguing with them and what they think. I remember David Dockwell, a dear friend of ours, he and I had a discussion when I first met him about religion, and then we decided we were both neurotic. He's pro-religion and mine anti-religion, and we never talked about it again. And we were very good friends. I mean, they came and stayed with us when we were in London, David and Kath, and as a philosophy lecturer, that made good sense. Anyhow,
All right, so now we move into the 70s.
Oh, okay.
Right, and if you have a look at the OPUS magazines, they start off very conservatively, and then when we went into the drug, LSD, marijuana, they start to morph along with the minds. So, again, this is Godfrey. We had a number of opuses that will look like opuses, but they were called the Stockton Ferry. I don't know if I've got a copy here, but anyway, I rang Godfrey to find out what these things were, and he said, oh, look, they were actual opuses, but they changed the name. It was all due to the brainchild of a fellow called Jim Byers, who was killed in a car accident on the Deadly Hume. And so that was great. I filed them in and I put the little note in there. And then when we started talking about this reunion, I went back to that note and I realised Godfrey told me that they'd made a film as well. And the film that they made was by this fella here, Bob Hill, and it was called Box. And there was one copy and it was sitting in the National Film and Sound Archive, and we managed to get a copy of it. But there's so many nude people in it. There's bums, there's full frontal penises, there's magical, there's ritual killing. I mean,
Are you sure you're
I said, so we wrote to the National Film and Sound. I said, we can't put this on our service. I said, well, look, we will here. It's our film. We made it here, didn't we, Bob? And so, look, our city needs a heritage. Give us it. And they did. Anyway, Bob, I didn't know this guy, and I just started demanding things. And he kindly and generously said yes to everything. So here he is to tell the story of the 1970 Stockton Ferry Opus and Jim Byers.
Hi there, everyone. It's really interesting hearing Alan because we inherited a lot of that information or that energy, if you like, some way or another. But the Stockton Ferry thing came out because we were young, big-haired art students, and we like every OPUS editors of every edition think they're here to reinvent the wheel, which we want to blow up all the other previous connections to OPUS totally. It was the countercultural years, and that's really what it. So Jim Byers, myself, and Max Ryan, and a guy called Bernie Kelly became the new editors. We don't know why, but the previous editors, we think, had to do something quite radical, which was study to pass some exams. I think a couple of postgraduate students or something in there. And we were given a room down. They say, "Oh, you're of course at Tighes Hill, weren't you?" I said, "Right, yeah." We were down the room under the union down there, where the student union office was at the back of it, and we were aliens, and we took that approach to the whole thing. So the first thing we did, and I'm so interesting to hear the connection, we put a Martin Sharp cover on. Of course, we were on the first wave of the offset printing, and we could get wraparound covers with colour. We did them in colour. The second one's awful, but the first one was Martin Sharp's dyslexic famous Vincent poster. I knew Martin from time, met him a few times along the way. And it just said everything, Vincent, blow your mind, expanding, exploding, it's a Van Gogh with Martin Sharp flourishes. A wonderful artist and, a landmark artist. I'm delighted we got some. We also stole a lot of other stuff from him as well. There's some bits and pieces there. The visuals in that time were basically you pillaged things from everywhere. You weren't sued for copyright so much. We grabbed stuff out of Zap comics, which were big at that period. This is the era we're in. So I should mention that I did a bit of a preamble. I went down the rabbit hole and started writing up the OPUS, this Stockton Ferry experience, and then went further into the rabbit hole. There was a big shadow over 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds. It was the National Service, the corps. And I've mentioned this a few times. I've spoken about the 70s to people, other groups. And I should say now I'm a just retired lecturer at AFTERS, which is Australian Film Television School, and also TAFE College. And I have a daughter up here who runs Screen Australia's investment. She's acting head of investment, previous scripter from Tighes Hill. There you go. The vodka comes around, goes around. So back in the National Service was a really big thing. It was like a big dark cloud that hung around, and there were demonstrations in streets and so forth. I actually wound up in one in Melbourne in 72, the Springbok one, which was, it actually radicalised my end of that generation at least. We were all very anti. The Liberal government had put themselves in this bind. They didn't know how to get out of it. When you see, and I was having 200,000 people going down the street, it's really quite expressive, quite impressive. Mm-hmm. So something was going on, Mr. Jones, and you don't know what it is. And it was us, we decided. So we blew up the old OPUS, and we just hated the name. It was like an arcane bit of Latin, probably it's linked to I think it's the website, the logo, the slogan of the council, isn't it? Something like, you get rewards if you do hard work. It sounded like the man to us, BHP and brutal labour. So anyway, we came up with Stockton Ferry, which was just nomic, It meant nothing other than a ferry that went across the harbour. And it was an icon, and it was just a brilliant wave flash from Max Ryan, who was our senior. It was by a year or two. It was a very interesting background. He'd been a journalist, a young journalist, but he'd been in a car accident which nearly killed him. He was in a coma for 8 months, and he came to university years later with a permanent limp and sort of a Zen aura from having actually. He could vouch for the Tibetan Book of the Dead from the other side, which was pretty interesting. So getting back to OPUS, we're fours, and we had 4 totally different agendas. We weren't, a lot of kind of passive-aggressive bickering. And I think that's probably, I don't know the other editors, but it might ring the odd bell with you. But you actually got it there.
Yeah.
Stockton Ferry. Oh, there it is. I'll put this one in. Yeah, if you go down, can you just go down, Scott? Just here.
I'll
operating it from down here.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go?
To show the name of the Stockton Ferry may also. One out the magazine. That may have been the one. So I've just touched something.
No, you're right. Johnny.
I'm here.
Oh,
Johnny.
Yeah, so
keep going down. If you would just a little bit. Next frame down. cryptic and meaningless, non-global, proudly claim you don't get it because we're more switched on than you. Our hubris is inexhaustible. And this becomes my obsession is more important than your obsession. This is about the internecine warfare, the bickering, the passive-aggressive bickering, all this sort of stuff. Keep going down, please, Johnny. Sorry, go back up there to we only found this later. Max came up with the title for Stockton Ferry, but it may have been linked. If you could just keep going back to the other picture of I think. Is this the right one?
You're after the Little Richard.
The Little Richard, yeah.
Yeah.
Who was reputed, and with good reason. I read through all the articles and stuff, and I knew before. Saw God on the Stockton Ferry.
Yeah.
Which I think any of you younger folk may not know the story as well. But God found God on the Stockton Ferry, or we found it previously, and decided to throw his jewellery overboard.
It's absolutely true, that story.
Yeah, and which turned out to be true for I can gather. So anyway, the name there it is Richard. At the big show at the Newcastle Stadium, which is where Broadmeadows.
Newcastle Market Town.
Market Town.
Well, I never found you.
No,
Market Town, we're Market Town.
Right, okay, gotcha, yeah. But if you
Museum's got the actual.
just a little bit further through, right?
They dug up, workmen dug up the actual stone to the stadium recently, 2017.
Sacred object.
Yeah, it's gone to the museum.
Not only Little Richard, but Jean Vincent, Nettie Cochran, good God, and the female Elvis Presley, Alice Leslie.
Yeah.
You can find her on YouTube. And it wasn't that bad. But so our touchstone, sorry, you can just scroll up, were basically, we're kind of stone smart hippies, punks. Really. Martin Sharp's gas station, we stole from Martin lavishly, and our editorial explanation was actually a mashup of, if you could just go over there, cartoon strip, Phil from Evergreen. Oh, Norman Talbot. Norman Talbot. Norman, we love Norman and Godfrey. The same touchstones as some of your later students. And this is my friend. This is Jim Byers about his. We had stories in there like this. This is Jim's drug bust. He was busted by 2 drug cops here for a really minuscule amount of weed or something that's really stuffs you up. And when, for example, you want to, it's a record, criminal record, so it's on your record. You could get arrested at a demonstration if it's a criminal record in those days. So, if you could just keep strongly, the Kings, this is a story I wrote where I tried to shock everybody. It's racist, homophobic, I think, homophobic, racist, violent, sexist, everything I could throw in together. It basically came from, this style came from National Lampoon magazine, essentially. The writers who later wrote things like Caddyshack and God knows what else, it's over very quickly. But it was sort of gonzo journalism, of that period. And we thought we had reinvented the planet, so we were going to come at you with both barrels of as much offence as we could possibly create. Thanks, John. Here we are. But I'll put this into Bernie Kelly, who was the acid trip. I was telling one of the boys before that he was logging his acid trips when I met him, and he eventually got up to 120. And I don't know what happened to Bernie much after. But the molecular evidence, so he was into all the acid academics, that's Alan Watts, but it was the Timothy Leary period. And so we invented a character called Alf Hickey. We slapped he was like an Ern Malley poet, but it was like a joke within a joke within a joke, if you like. And again, saying that we're smarter and more hip than you are. And if you don't get it, well, you're not one of us or something. This character called Bob Bill, obviously an alias who wrote a sort of libelous article about her reviewing an artist whom I love at Anne Bomberto's gallery. We didn't like Anne, she was too snooty for us. She didn't like us. And so if you keep going, and I don't want to get bust it, Jim writing about doing. This is Jim Byers, who could write 18 years of age at this stage, I think came in early. And his music reviews were fabulous. This is pre-digital age. You couldn't research anything. There was no YouTube. There's no this. He did it all magazines. He was a total West Coast music hippie, if you like. He looked like one who was beaded headbands, long hair, very beautiful looking guy. And you see, Indian tops, fringe jacket, fringe boots. Fringe boots. There were fringe suede boots in that period. So keep going. Obligation, a couple of things. Timothy Leary, I think this is Bernie. Little ads.
I'll do this one. This is so funny.
About LSD and something called about Lane and Steele with the cops who busted him. They come looking for us. They would have kicked our butts in. So that was and that's the real phone number apparently at the time for the police. Even I sort of went. But we had we were masters of the universe. We're 19, 20, 21 years old. We could do anything. Second edition, we found an artist. We should have put Martin Chubb on the cover. This is our hippie artist. He's actually he decode these hieroglyphics here. It's actually sort of anti-acid, which is unusual. I was the most control freak. But of course, if we keep scrolling up, I actually broke down the whole issue. Here are the editors. Bernie, the hippie. Go there, okay. Max, the sort of the guru, if you like. Myself turning away with the only cigarette I probably ever tried to smoke. And Jim Byers. And Janis Joplin had managed to die absurdly like a week or two before we put the issue out. We went down, although I should say we were in the Threlkeld office or someone. They took care of us. They said, coming down, we knew nothing about how to put out a magazine. We were in total chaos the whole time. And they showed us how to do it. Here's Bernie's road trip of a product called Blue Cheer, which was the current new acid that appeared on the market. And like a motoring journalist, he helpfully gives you advice and some warnings and bits and pieces. And yes, I mean, what a public service, how public kind of citizen Bernie was. And he actually talks about listening to the the electric prunes at the time, and their choral work, Mass in F minor, which they didn't actually play on because none of them could play classical music, but it's just Kyrie eleison over and over again. We had to be turning on acid. We were basically turning you, as Godfrey Tanner said, to turn on, tune in, drop out. We were in the counterculture.
And we're only up to page 29 of 59 pages that you wrote.
Oh, I kept going. I'm sorry. This is, but it was still better than the non-hippie LSD journal that was printed in like a Twilight Zone in some magazine, and it just keeps going on. And then there's another outrageous story where we tried to offend those we missed the first time, all by anonymous authors. We asked Godfrey for an article, and he put in this article, and I've read it several times lately because I still have no idea what it's about. It's something to do, it's got all these obsessions in Anglican Synod, who he lobbied for marriage, gay marriage. This is 1969 or 70 or something like that. This article's written earlier, I suspect. He just sent it over. But there's a whole pile of things about Greek democracy versus our democracy. And there's actually little sort of hints in there that are relevant today about oligarchs. You were way ahead, but he was too intelligent for us. Then Norman, an article by Norman, about breaking down. And Norman, when you read it, and I read it at the time, this is the best article we actually printed. This is where Norman puts his intellectual powers, which are considerable, into breaking down pop music and how good the poetry was of this period. So all the poetry, this is better than the stuff being printed in books. And also a gentle slap down about drug taking and LSD, and most of the poetry, good songs, lyrics are almost anti-drug when you get down. Keep scrolling through. There's some other bits and pieces. There's a story or two at the end of it, and I printed that. Jeff, that was one of the things that the NUSA magazine. And here it is. This is where I join and merge and morph into the film that I made. There's some character called Bob Hill in 1970. His next wife, Jean Talbot, Norman's wife.
Oh, good heavens.
And that's in my bedroom in King Street in a building they tore down called Malmo. This beautiful old building. And then there's the mate that goes on with Bryn Newton-John co-signed my application. Pretty something. One of the reasons I got the grant for the first place, and this is John Gordon government years, 69, 70. Remember John Gordon? And we made the film. They gave him the money. Eventually ran out very quickly. Used all the students and the usual way of getting sort of, hey, what you doing Saturday? Want to be in a film? Was the usual go-to. I put this poster together and it's got things in it like, all this normal bloom. It says the artist's mother does not appear in the film. I just wanted to let you know that we were still Stockton Ferry and we're letting you, we were smarter than you or something like that, or we thought we were. And here's some more Max Ryan poetry doggerel, and I wrote a review that looked like a stroppy, know-nothing folk artist review. And remember the Valhalla? Remember those things on your fridge in your share house days? Something? Why Jimi Hendrix was in the middle of this article, there's a couple of reviews that no one knows. That article on the right's actually by Tony Hassel. Those of you doing English, remember Tony?
Yes.
And he wrote, he defends Portnoy's complaint because it was a period of censorship, and that's really what that was about. And he did it very well. It was boring as hell. We should have really done something else. And here we go about, what was this about? Sorry, could you just go back up? The Freak Brothers. We, when in doubt, print Gilbert Sheldon, print that comic material. And this is about the fabulous Freak Brothers making a film about being turned into psychotic killers from smoking marijuana, which of course of Grief of Madness, 1935-36 was a perennial favourite of canvases. It's fantastic. This one here, down in the bottom corner, Max found this. It was an ad, a real ad of a suburban newspaper. Johnny Raver, special guest to open a fete with autographed money box footballs. And Johnny he was a rugby league international player, and had been quietly shunted up to Newcastle because of multiple misdemeanors, where eventually up here he found even more trouble, more mischief. But we couldn't resist printing that. Because of the autographed money box footballs. And the last one up here was the only letter of complaint from the God Squad. The only muscular, they wanted us, Christian and Five News, if they managed to make it that inciting Jesus to zap the effeminate and unmanly filth creators of the Stockton Ferry, which we regard as a fantastic achievement. We would have sent them an autographed money box football if we'd found one. And then this is where it gets dark. Jim Byers, 1973, waiting to collect my youngest brother, waiting for the Rolling Stones concert. I think I was to meet Jim there, or I'm pretty sure we were. And my youngest brother had flown down as a musician, still a musician. Jim had been killed in a car crash in 73, which flattened us all completely. As you can imagine, there was sort of like, we only did 2 editions of Stockton Ferry. We're kind of over it. There was talk of a third one, which was going to be all visual, like a collage thing, which would have been our way of totally destroying it. And Johnny's put this together, and then here's clips from him. You see, Jim was just a beautiful looking guy, extraordinary. And the end of it's typical hippie. It's Jodorowsky, El Topo period. It's a period of New York transgressive films and so forth, underground filmmaking. You really had to be there, They're all nearly unwatchable, and including some of my best friends, and some of them became almost household names in filmmaking. We've all got them in our past. So I don't know if you want to keep going into the Stockton Ferry, the box thing, but it's I don't want to bore everyone to death. But just quickly, if you like, thanks, Johnny, to doing all this, grabbing these. Look, the truth is, since Johnny found the film, which I'm stunned and amazed by, I've had a real career, inverted commas, since, if you call it that. I'm a feature film production designer. That's how I was actually in the wrong place. I should have been at the art school. But they weren't giving out, maybe they were teachers' college scholarships. The lovely Gothic building, which was actually a real hotbed of talent in the early 70s. And really great artists came from there. And even if they became teachers, not even if, but if those who became teachers were very, very influential in the Australian arts scene generally. 2 or 3 of whom I grabbed, of course, for this production.
You have to be over 18 to see it on YouTube. It's unlisted, so it's just linked through there.
Yeah, I can't watch, or I haven't watched it yet, and I've just done a few grabs if we could. In the film, we bury Jim alive. What could possibly be? Pleased about watching that again. It's still sort of raw. It's something years later, you know, it happened yesterday. I remember this better than I remember this morning, you know, in a funny way. I think many of us are like that.
It happens as you get older.
It happens, doesn't it? So, but the images were really crisp and sharp, and now they're very blurry and blotched, and sort of colours have morphed together, I think. Tracking it down, I haven't asked Johnny how he found me, and I heard how he found the film. It's in the archive. I didn't want to ever see it again for two reasons. Firstly, Jim, obviously, and second, it had a bit of the sort of university distribution and film club stuff. As obligations were shown here, and then I think in Melbourne University, because I managed to get another $500 out of Melbourne University on the grounds that the debt collectors were looking for me because I had money on the prints, talking to filmmaking, and it's now permanent. The thing about film, it's permanent. It's like a tattoo. It's there forever. You know, if you imagine that.
The irony, Bob, is that Jim continues to live in this meeting. Okay, and it was just after hearing about it. I know it's a dark irony. We're all going to get there at some point, but he lives on in your film, and it was wonderful to see him move. And look, we get all this stuff all the time here. It's almost like communicating with the dead working in an archive, and these stories have to be told.
Well, first of all, I'm grateful that Johnny found me and said something like, "I'm delighted to hear I'm alive." I think that's with my full concentration. The second thing is I kind of semi-retired this year. I've been teaching for the last 15 odd years, overlapping. I really stopped working in film in about 2014 or something, like 10 years ago, but it's brutal, it's physical, and it's stress. And I, even once or twice a week sometimes, I have what I call green bat nightmares, of the unfinished set. That for you, it's the unstudied maths test. And it comes at me in about 50 different ways. I mean, I lived on deadlines. I've been freelance all my life, basically, after a bit of early experience with the government film in it. But, you know, the physical wear and tear on you is quite amazing, and mental, but it stays with you, it gets in your DNA. I think many of your own jobs probably do the same thing. But a few months ago, I started thinking about Jim again, just out of the blue. And it's like when Johnny contacted me, I almost wasn't surprised. It was funny. I'm thinking I've come to the end of my working career, so to speak, and, you know, who put me here? Well, Jim and I were film heads. Jim and I used to send. He was an orphan. He lived with his brother's family, who was a vet at Charlestown. Wooden cottage out the back of the main back of Charlestown, the street. But we used to go down there and we'd watch his brother's black and white TV, and we'd watch. That's all NBN Ren films those days. Things like Thin Man, the Myrna Loy movies, the 1930s. We watched Jean Harlow movies. We watched classic films, and we just analysed them endlessly. So we had this passion. And I'd started making a film with Jim in 72, and again, and it would, again, it was just a trailer, but I didn't want to go on with after Jim's death in 73. So, but I started thinking about Jim again, and it just literally out of the blue. And there you go. It was, you know, it was meant to happen. So
we'll continue to live in the Hunter Living Histories and the university site forevermore.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much.
That's great.
Okay, now I don't know if anyone from the 80s is here, but this was the Newcastle Herald from the 1990s. I think, Linda, you were editor at this time, weren't you?
Yeah.
And this was the headline that caught me, given what Trump's been on about. Look at that.
Oh, and they
becomes
say
50
the
seconds.
Simpsons can like project what's going to happen in the future, but Opus did as
Canada
well.
ceases to exist. Well, that was from a spoof edition that was supposed to have come out in 2012.
Wow.
And I spoke to Eddie O'Reilly about this, but that was the actual real edition that actually came out in 2012. Marcus, you were in the 90s too, weren't you? And 66.
Yeah, so I was, I came to university in the first year after the amalgamation of the Hunter Institute of Higher Education and the University of Newcastle, studied communications studies, and thought it was quite crazy that I didn't have to beat off other hordes of budding journalism students to want to be editor of the uni newspaper. So was editor alongside the late great Matt Cantrell and Michael Jamison, and then stayed at Opus as a volunteer and the editor until I graduated. Put out my last cigarette in the Opus office in 1993 and haven't smoked since. And I find it quite intriguing just listening to the stories from before as well and just the different times. So I went to university in the first year of HECS. So, for me, coming to university was quite a vacation. So for me, going to Opus helped me, forge my journalism career, but also taught me as well because you basically had to be able to do anything. I guess that's what I've learned along the way. So switch from print journalism to digital and now work in research communications. So, it was wonderful, and it's just such a great community to be a part of as well. And so, Marcus, you followed a year or two after me, was it?
I think it was 3 years after, yeah. So you were the editor when I first arrived at university.
Yeah.
And you intimidated the hell out of me because
of my hair.
You were the editor. It seemed like a very prestigious and important thing at the time. And I remember sheepishly hoping I might be able to get something published in Opus. And then I remember 3 years later being co-editor and having to write about half of it myself because there weren't enough contributors. And we had about five pseudonyms each, Sean Healy and I, who were co-editors at the time. So we were co-editors in 1995, and it's we put Opus on the internet, which was one of the first publications ever in Australia to publish on the web, which was interesting, and the result of the fact that I couldn't get an internet account through my communications course because the communications department believed I should have studied computer science if I wanted to use a computer. And so that was my backdoor way of getting into getting online, but that worked. And look, Sean and I were very obsessed with all things sort of media and political things, and I seem to remember our first issue featured photos of us getting arrested, probably protesting something Alan's government was doing at the time. Personally.
So Marcus, what year was that?
1995.
So I've got them up there now.
But look. So interesting for me. I actually was a terrible failure at university. I'd never finished my degree. Pretty much all of the relevant experience to set me up for everything else I ended up doing later in life came from editing Opus and from some of the other things we did as part of the Students' Association. So I was activities officer as well, I think the year before for the Students' Association. Sean, who was my co-editor and our cohort of sort of Students' Association people, we went on to start Octopod together in Newcastle the following year. And a lot of us were involved in This Not Art Festival and some of the other things that came from that later. And interestingly, sort of when we were doing This Is Not Art, one of the really key things that was really important to that in the early years was a national student media conference. We brought all the editors of all the student papers in Australia together here in Newcastle for pretty much every year for about 3 or 4 years. I don't know how much longer that lasted after that. But that student media community has been a really big part of the networks that I have worked with. And I've always felt this sort of weird camaraderie with other Opus editors when I've crossed paths with them in different places. When I first moved to Sydney, and I got my first real full-time job, I moved to Sydney, very intimidated, felt very out of my depth. And there was an older guy there who seemed very cool and very smart in all the ways that I wasn't. And that was Mark Mordew, who shortly afterwards informed me that he'd been Opus editor in 1980 and has gone on to become one of my very good friends over the years. So, I think it was a really interesting time. I think if you think about the sort of different eras, ours I think was very much a time where sort of technology was impacting media. I think it's reflected in our obsessions if you go back and look through the content and through the different things that we sort of went on to do sort of coming out of Opus. But as I said, it was absolutely sort of pivotal and vital experience. There you go, the online multimedia edition, which was the first one ever on the web. And I think I'm not aware of another publication, full stop, in Australia that was publishing online prior to that.
Right, yeah. So is the web link still active?
I suspect not, although I believe the National Library might have archived it. I recall it. I think it might be somewhere.
We'll have to try and dig it up. And
like
that's machine or something.
Yeah, it's like we're talking early 95. A lot of those other things didn't exist, like the archiving wasn't.
You never know what you find in it. Look, that's a picture of me with my mother's wig I'm wearing my mother's glasses and my mother's wig.
We're pretending to be an Elvis impersonator.
Oh, wow.
You look different.
I know.
I think we all look different. Fair to say.
This is the wonders of the Opus. Once they're digitised, you find all sorts of little
The
tricks.
other thing, I was going to say what a great project it is to archive it, but equally, if you told me it would be archived and available to anyone, however many years later, I might have reconsidered some of the decisions about what we published at the time. But it sounds like I'm not the only one with some fairly poor quality skeletons.
To a giant photo of a butt next to me, like someone's butt. I don't even know whose butt that was, but anyway.
Yeah, I was a bit worried about Matthew Thompson's editions because of all the bums, and we've already been through the bums and the genitals in 1970s Opus, and but there have been bums all the way through. Opus is documented by nudity. So you know. So Angela, when did you come in? Did you come in the 90s too, or?
I was 97, and like Marcus, I started in 95, and Marcus was editor, and I remember being really intimidated, and I think Marcus and I were texting about this a couple of weeks ago, really intimidated just going down there and wanting to write something, and then Marcus and Sean were nice enough to give me a bit of a student journalism job in that year, and so I just sort of, interviewed people around campus and, thought I was awesome doing stories around. And then, Hamish and I were editors in 97. So I think it was a very stressful year, but geez, we had a lot of fun. And Matt, who's sitting in there, I can see Matt was, in our office as well. And I just remember us having just a ridiculous amount of fun. And I don't think we ever really took anything too seriously. But I think one of the things Matt and I were talking about, it would have been our first edition, Johnny, was in 97. We got to the end of putting it all together and realised we forgot to do a front cover. So our first edition was black, and we called it Opus by Night, but the black ink just rubbed off on everything. So everyone around campus, you could see, just had black feet prints that was looking at it. So that was a trap for young players, that one. But we did the full year with the O book as well. So met my husband that year too. So there you go. He came in to review some CDs. And that was however many years ago? 28 years ago.
Wow.
There's a follow-up. How many people met their partners at Opus as well? Because I met my partner and his best friend.
My major problem has just been tracking down all the missing ones.
Well, how many sexual harassment cases have there been over the years?
It's with all the bums, Mark.
So are there any people zooming in that want to are mixed up with this thing, but we haven't sort of known about? Like, James, are you one of them?
Oh, James.
Yes. So I edited Opus in 1999 with John McCann, and a bit of a wild ride. And I was just reflecting. I haven't thought about Opus, I have to say, extensively until Angela actually contacted me through LinkedIn and said, "Hey, there's this get together." So it's great to hear some of the stories from the past. But it was just thinking, that common theme of just jumping into the deep end with no idea, and in our case, probably no real platform for running a magazine. We campaigned, got all of our mates to help get us voted in. But really no clue how to run a magazine, no clue how to do offset printing. Had some design chops perhaps, but we also, maybe our claim to fame, maybe not quite as prestigious as Marcus is getting the first online publication. We bought the first digital camera, which is about $2,000, 3.2 megapixel beast back in the day, and we're very, very proud of that. But I think there's jumping in the deep end, no idea what we're doing. Having very nice printers from, I can't remember the name of them anymore, were coming around, and the print manager coming and sitting patiently staring at a computer screen while they packaged all the files up to take off to publication, because again, we just didn't have any clue about what we're doing. But amazing learning experience, and I think it's a little bit cringeworthy to go back now and read some of the editorials that we wrote. But it was fantastic, and certainly a launchpad for just having a crack at things, I think, and being a little bit fearless. But also, I just wanted to share one story, because I was a contributor to Opus, and I can't remember whether I was intimidated or not. But in the first year, I was writing. I was a budding poet back then, and And so,
You're going to tell the story, aren't you? This is the story that I was going to ask if you didn't mind me sharing too.
That's right. Clearly not. So I was a budding poet, and I was obviously, as a very impressionable 19 or 18-year-old, whatever it was at the time, I was very heartfelt in everything I did. So I was submitting a lot of poems to Ange and Hamish, and they were kind enough to publish them. But every single issue, I was like cursed, and something would go wrong with the printing, and like all of my titles would disappear, or whole lines. And eventually, they gave me like the James Stewart Memorial Poetry Spread in the last issue, and I wasn't sure they were taking the piss and having a go at me or letting me like express myself. Anyway, so I took it up. I'm like, great, this is fantastic. And then got the publication, and then opened it up. Very proud to see it. And again, the same thing happened. I think all the titles had disappeared.
We decided to do spot colour. It was called the James Stewart Memorial Poetry Page, and we decided to do spot colour, but we forgot to put the spot colour in. And so, all of his words were missing. And then the follow-up to that, James, is that however many years later, I walk into a job interview and James is interviewing me. This was back in maybe 2001.
Something like that, yeah.
And I went, I'm never getting this job. Because James is going to remember the poem page. But sure enough, we ended up working together for the next, 2 years or something.
Yeah, that's right. We get more war stories. So, I think, spot colours don't kill relationships, as it turns out.
So where are you zooming in from, Angela and James?
I am in the Hunter, but I was going to be there today, but my son had an emergency dental appointment. So, yes, I am in the Hunter.
I'm in Sydney now, in Canterbury, although my former colleague and good friend John lives up in Newcastle, actually. And, it was an amazing time, and it was a friendship for life that we formed through that period. Also, didn't quite meet my partner for life, but Marcus, you'd be pleased to know I met my girlfriend and the first real love of my life through the Student Media Conference back in 1999 or 2000. So there was love in the air, definitely at Opus.
Maybe we can do a retrospective Opus. Maybe the younglings can put that one together or something.
Postscript.
Yeah.
For those of you who go to the web and look up our last edition, you'll notice that it shows the editorial is blank, apart from an old block.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the story behind that was Tony and I did this editorial, and the first character of each line said, Opus says get fucked.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Bruce Ferner, who was a very good friend and a really good bloke, was business editor. And after they'd been circulating for a bit, someone put it out to Bruce, and Bruce went hysteric because he would be liable, as the publisher, he was legally liable for the paper. So he got sat down with a pair of scissors and kept cutting them out. And then somebody, I don't know who, it might have been the uni or I don't know who, might have been George Mainprice, because George is still a friend. We know George. George is a minister in the valley somewhere.
He's dead.
But George was fully conservative. But somebody got them reprinted without the editorial, so that's why the blank section.
There's a question, if I can ask: has any editors ever been prosecuted, or is publisher been prosecuted? Despite all the
investigated,
it'd be worth a look.
These guys probably. Maybe.
I didn't have a letter from a lawyer, but
we got
the young Liberals,
and threats.
That's another thing along with the
Now, Christian Wright came and asked.
So what's your name?
Sorry?
No. Your name?
Marcus Westbury.
Oh, Marcus, you changed
You were my teacher.
Oh, I
You were one of my teachers.
Whereabouts? At Jesmond?
Jesmond.
At Jesmond?
Yeah.
I was thinking about your mother on Friday.
All right.
No, the story there.
Dr. Matthew Thompson, and you out there in Zoom land somewhere. And Renee Carlson.
He's done a lot.
Yes.
It's just me.
Hello.
It's just me tonight.
So, all right. So Matthew is beaming in from Oregon. So that's a round of applause.
Hi, everyone.
So Matthew, yours was the most notorious world because there was so much going on in 2000.
with accusations of obscenity and hookers for books. And so, fill in the story.
Well, it just seemed a bit like people should be able to say what they want at that time. And so we just let everybody, including ourselves, say what they wanted. And then we had campaigns against us. So the African Student Society took a bitter disliking to our libertarian ways and were trying to campaign to have us shut down. And then Roger Holmes, was it, the VC at the time, who was the world's stodgiest dude, ended up sticking up for us and telling the African Student Association, I think it was it Tabani, a Zimbabwean dude, who was very against anything he thought was immoral, but he was the world's worst driver who ended up killing someone on the M1. And which was no surprise after I rode with him to like the New Lambton Heights or something. It was like, this guy's going to kill someone. And then it was like, within a year, he killed someone. But anyway, so Roger Holmes stuck up for us, and which was weird to me. But I remember we were like, we let born again Christians write for us. We let atheists write for us. Anyone and everyone. So after the African students were trying to shut us down, and then Roger stood up for us, we had this meeting with them, and they started writing for us. So it's like everybody just wrote for us, and everybody hated each other. But then we kind of had this sort of coming together through war. It was like everyone ended up having a laugh because they could see that it was actually okay to say what you want on one page, and then on another page have someone say the opposite. It was like, all right, nothing terrible is going to happen, So we then, I mean, it was like, it looks like it's provocative and explicit and obscene, and we did have things like 1.5 hour phone calls from the Office of Film and Literature Classification, the OFLC, but we got out and like squirmed around everything. It was an era of great maneuverability. So the one thing I remember that the OFLC got all worked up about was I wrote a piece on the marriage of Jeff Koons and Ciccolina, the Hungarian Italian porn star turned politician. And I kind of took her side in their divorce in this article, but we reproduced his photographs of them, which were completely, what was it, like Ilona's Arsehole 1996 or something was the title of one of them, whatever. But Koons photographed them and then had the photographs reproduced as oil on canvas. So I had this like 1.5 hour phone call with the OFLC where they gave up in the end because I was saying it's oil on canvas. It's not a photograph. And so it ended up, they said, that's art. Okay, we accept it's art. So everything was just art then. So whatever we did had the excuse of it being art, but it was anything and everything. So the hookers for books thing, that was when there was some problems with funding for the library and maintenance, whatever. So we prostituted ourselves. I can't. What's the street at near? What is it? Ties Hill. Heading from Ties, Islington Road, isn't it? Like there. Yeah. And I remember Dieter Michael, who was writing for Opus at the time. His stepfather, Canadian guy, his stepfather had some retro old station wagon. We all dressed up as prostitutes and went and stood on the road. And then he drove slowly past, and having borrowed his stepfather's car, and NBN turned up and filmed the whole thing. So it kind of looked like Dieter's stepfather was soliciting in the daytime. But and Mel O'Brien was involved in that too. Is now like a kind of international genocide expert. She was also a hooker for books at the time. So it was a great, it's a good thing to have on your resume, you know, like if you want to end up like speaking at The Hague and things and trying to, you know, get Ratko Mladic or whatever from the Serb army to justice, to say that your path to that was like Islington and soliciting there, but to raise money for Newcastle, University of Newcastle Library. But there was, I mean, after the little hour and a half call with the OFLC and all that, what happened then was people had to show photographic ID. That's right. To like, you get carded or whatever to get Opus. And after it might have been, I mean, I don't want it to seem like it's just me versus Africa or something, but after the African Student Association, I believe, contacted the OFLC and they contacted us, the compromise was to show ID to get Opus. So once that happened, it was the fastest distributed Opus of all time, with like hundreds of copies a day going. People from NUSA having to see IDs and things. We just ended up putting most of them at the bar because you're supposed to be 18 anyway there. But it's just complete madness. And then we had, you know, photo competitions, poetry competitions, and then there was the guy that some of you probably know. What's his name? Fellow who may have been on the schizoaffective disorder spectrum quite strongly, who used to write in very angular handwriting, like completely paranoid poems. And he would come in and try to slap women working at NUSA. He was like a schizophrenic, misogynist, violent offender who I remember one day I was wearing a fez for some reason. I can't remember exactly why. I think someone had brought me a fez as a peace offering or something, and so I was fezzed up, and this guy tried to attack the women at NUSA. Was it Brid, the Irish woman, and a few others, and I ended up chasing him up the stairs through the whole, you know, student area and stuff, as he was yelling that I had degraded his nom de plume. But it was an eventful year, and then at the end of this, or towards the end of this, after having it almost shut down by offending the entire African continent, the parents or step-parents being suspected of soliciting prostitutes, long involved calls with government departments, rebellions from was it resistance? They were angry that we gave we gave like pro-liberal and Christian students like open slather to write what they like. So resistance were at war with us, but then we let them write what they wanted to. So they were just confused. And then it turned out that many of them actually couldn't write. That was the problem. Like, and then the worst thing, I think the worst thing we came across was when we had resistance people studying sociology. So it was like, if you combine sociology with any kind of ideology, you end up with very hard to edit copy coming in, where it was complete like gibberish, which then I ran in full. I can't remember the guy's name now, but I think he went on to become an academic, so it's probably defamatory if I name him, but it was such complete gibberish that I thought it was a work of art. So we would run like left-wing sociology students' earnest writings, unedited, and then people would come in who maybe like you're running the Timothy Leary stuff in the 70s and things, and Marcus, I know you were campaigning quite heavily for the kind of cannabisization of things, which Oregon is, like this photo behind me is now the complete wonderful culmination of. Anyway, when we ran the complete unedited sociological ramblings of quite earnest students, it just blew people's minds if they'd had any chemicals, because it was just so incoherent. It was marvelous. It was like, you know, Coons goes one way with like turning Chicholina into oil on canvas or getting a basketball and suspended in formaldehyde. This was like sociology suspended in formaldehyde. It's just this thing you could circle and stare at and never quite know if it means something or not. It was wonderful. So we had the best time ever doing this. But I remember we did have to clear out the NUSA office a lot because it was hard to concentrate, because we had before we took it over, it seemed like it'd become a kind of hangout zone, and to try to edit, to do art, to lay things out. And I remember we had to drive to Canberra as well to deliver files once to the printers and things. It was just like a hell of a lot of work. And then we'd have, if you remember Nick Patey, I mean, Nick Patey didn't disrupt things, but I just found it spellbinding, because he would walk in, and he had the angular handwriting too, actually, and sad demise, but he would empty half a coffee tin into a mug and then pour a bit of hot water and just like stir this mud and kind of eat it. And I thought it was Milo, and it was like, no, it's coffee, man, things. And so we'd publish his stuff. The great, like he was a precursor to auto summarize in Word. If you've ever said, reduce the length of this by like 20%, and it just takes out words at semi-random and things end up as like Philip K. Dick kind of strange amphetamine consciousness thing. Nick Patey came out directly like that. I mean, it was kind of so he was nice to place with sociology, but I guess you had to have something in the middle where people would just, you know, their head would split. But yeah, terrific times. And then during the year, it seemed like NUSA and Newcastle University was such a wide open thing. What was that's right. And then I decided, why not use this platform like Trump with The Apprentice, but to run for president. So during the year, then I ran for the next year presidency, and it was against Resistance. And Resistance couldn't write a coherent campaign statement. I just said, let's have fighting and writing. So it was, so we decided to put up a illegal women's boxing contest at the university and a national writing competition. And I just romped it in, won the election, and then walked away from Opus having like graduated. It was like the acid test, you know, with Ken Kesey, because now in Oregon, it's like I'm in Southern Oregon and have met and written about the Merry Pranksters, and it's kind of like Newcastle University in 2000 was a nice little echo through time of like Kesey consciousness, except instead of having the state hospital at Salem, we had the University of Newcastle and the Tanner Bar and the NUSA. So it was good. It was a nice workout. So now, like I still do kind of the same thing, but at Spin Magazine in the US, where I work for Bob Guccione Jr., the son of the guy who started Penthouse Magazine. So he's this music magazine, but I don't really write about music. So it's the Merry Pranksters or the Ammon Bundy and the Bundy family with the rancher wars against the government, or it's just like Opus forever. So I just live in this kind of weird Opus. I like completely live in Opus now. Like I'm more in Newcastle circa the late 90s and things than I did at the time. It's like distilled now. I'm in this distillation of Opusness. And
spreading into the world. Good on you.
I don't know what else to do. I mean, like, what else is there to do but Opus forever? I mean, why would anyone want to do anything else? Like, it was so good. It was so much fun, and the Opuses before were so good, and like, why ever stop?
So, well, look, we're 15 minutes over time and everyone's wanting to leave the room now. You got to go.
Well, I did, yes.
Did you have anything to do with Opus?
No. I stayed out of politeness.
That's all right. Look, it's well, look, our question here is obviously what's inspired this is we like to know what's happened at Opus now. So we got where's it happening? Are you the youngling? We're all doing this for you, you know.
Yes.
Okay. So what's happening?
Well, we have like work integrated students coming in now for the second semester. So can you speak up?
Can you speak up? We can't hear you.
Sorry, we have work integrated learning students doing it for their placement now. So this is the second semester that we've done this. Last semester we had both a graphic designer and an editor. But this
Have they
semester
been arrested yet? Anyone been arrested from the new lot?
Not yet. No, we're getting there though.
Good.
Yeah, now we have a graphic designer as well doing our hot tea like drama issue as well.
Yeah, it's been interesting. So my name's Lucas. I'm at the New Association, and I look after our marketing and communications over there now. We also have inherited Opus since we formed in 2021, and it's been interesting listening to you all talk about budget and funding and trying to get funding and trying to get contributors as well. And it's really interesting to hear that those old problems are still kind of existing in the new world. And something we faced lately is, and I'm sure you faced it in your time, is trying to get the budget and the funding to be able to have an active student presence at the university. So it's probably not chugging along as greatly as you guys fondly remember it. We're trying that we have a small team that we're trying to keep it going along. But yeah, we have moved from having a team working on Opus. We have placement students that work on Opus now. So we as part of the association's KPIs each year, we need to provide placement opportunities for students. So that's what we use Opus for, and we get our communications students through, and graphic design students come through and do their placements with Opus. So yeah, if you had any further questions about where Opus is today, I could try and answer. Yana actually is working at the association with us, and she is the brains behind a lot of what Opus is doing today. And Yana helps facilitate all of the placements happening so that students can come in as part of their studies. They have to do placements now. I think we're up to 140 hours now they have to do across the board. So this provides them with an opportunity to do something that they want to do when they leave universities. Yeah.
Sounds all very growing up.
This isn't much less opportunity for crime.
No. Look, it was really interesting to hear about. I think you touched on the relationship we have with the university now, how we are funded directly with the university, and that's definitely something where we have to try and navigate very carefully. And the view that I've always told our contributors and our students that work on Opus is, I see the association as being, I guess, the foster child of Opus, but we are not Opus. You guys working in Opus, the students working in Opus, are the student voice. So we do try and afford that opportunity wherever we can to, I guess, say things that are a little bit controversial and provide that platform for student sentiment. And at the same time, we just have to make sure that the association is a little bit distanced from things so that we're not getting any kind of backlash there. But yeah, we are definitely all for student voice at Opus at the moment. Yeah, it's just very different, I guess, now to navigate.
The world has changed,
The world has changed anyway. Look, thank you everyone for being part of this. Look, it's like we've got a selection of magazines Lucas and Yana have put together here, so please enjoy them if you get a chance. Thanks very much, Matt, for all your help in pulling together these people and everyone that's come along. Look, part of this is also to inspire you because no one here gets out alive. And I tell you, one thing I learned from in the archives is that life is very short and we must do what we have to do and not behave too much, because if you do, you're going to be strangled, your life will be strangled and you will waste your life. And the most wonderful times are the times when this youthful energy that doesn't know where the brick walls are and just smashes through everything. And it's quite amazing going through. I mean, most of those writings, Matthew, of Nick Patey. I mean, Nick Patey used to go to parties. I mean, it was amazing just seeing the amount of writing that was in that that opus. Nick continues to live as Jim continues to live in your publication. So, I mean, I don't know, from my point of view, it's really something must encourage mischievousness and really respond to the world, because at the moment it really is an interesting place and it needs a response, it needs words, it needs actions. So anyway, farewell. Thank you very much.
Thanks for organising, Johnny.
It's quite the elbow view. Is that Marcus's elbow?
Yes, the elbow of Marcus Westbury. Wasn't it a Jeff Koons piece?
Missed that sense of holiday. Hey Matthew, were you the young people against heavy metal t-shirts, Matt Thompson?
Yes.
I thought so. I remember seeing you at the Writers' Festival.
Oh God!
Guess what year that was?
It's like 98 or something, 97, 98.
Yeah, it was 98.
Marcus set that up. That's right.
Yeah.
That was with Shane Paxton, the guy that had the
Shane,
with the dude with the toupee.
Ray Martin. Actually, no, it was it was Ray and oh no, it was Ray, wasn't it?
Yeah, but then at the festival he ended up like obsessively angry with the guy who does the pranks and things. What's the guy's name? He's still doing TV shows. James, you remember him? The guy who does the pranks and stuff? Who did the race around the world thing with the ABC?
John
Saffron.
Oh, John Saffron, yeah.
So Shane Paxton ended up like weirdly angrily obsessed with John Saffron because I don't know. Did he have something to do with Ray Martin too or something? Like they were.
Yeah.
They both, and then he turned against Saffron and and then there was Helen Darville Dale, who was there too, who pretended to be Ukrainian. She was in on the Ukrainian thing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she pretended she was.
And she did the dances in Ukrainian peasant costumes.
Yes, I've forgotten about that. Yeah, that would have been 98. KPIs.
Yeah, KPIs.
No thanks. We just want to make stupid Tom Cruise jokes. We don't want to be accountable. We're 19.
Whether you see you in a room with you KPIs to meet Matt though.
Do we need to stay, Johnny? Are we going?
So that's my question. I think that's where you
I'm better go in a sec.
Thanks to you, Matt. Thanks to you, Ange. Thanks, everyone.
Talk soon, James. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Watching from the screen.
Nice seeing you, Marcus.